I got so many responses to my video from last week about asking a woman her body count. And men were outraged, and many of them compared it and said, well, stop asking about how much money we make, right? So that's what I want to talk about today. If you're a man or a woman, this episode is for you because I'm going to share all sorts of stories from my personal life, my friends' personal lives living in Manhattan, and the 18 years of coaching, the clients that I've talked to. So I'm Donna Barnes. Welcome to my Broken to Brave podcast. So to start, if you don't really know who I am, I moved to Manhattan in the 80s as a teenager because I got a modeling agency who got me my first apartment. And they ran my life, right? My booker was like my mom. And unfortunately, my mom had died not that long ago, within that year, actually. So, as a teenage girl from the suburbs of Philadelphia to be thrown into the modeling industry in Manhattan in the 80s, I'll tell you, it was quite an education. And yeah, I mean, just all the crap that went along with being a model, really. They used to have modeling parties, and you weren't allowed to bring a date. And it was all a bunch of jerks that were like looking to meet models. They all wanted to meet models. And then, yeah, I ended up dating a guy later who was much older than me who would say, oh, Elite is having their modeling party tonight. Let's go. And I was like, the last thing I want to do is go to a modeling agency party, right? Like, I'm required to go to my own agency's parties, which the whole like sex and love and models and musicians and like the whole 9 yards of it was actively played out in my life for the first really, I mean, geez, I lived in New York for the majority of my adult life, except for 6 years in the Los Angeles, which, the whole casting couch thing I've been very open about with, me too, because everybody has a story, right? So I would love to share some of my insights. And before I even start, my advice is to never, ever stay in a relationship with somebody that you're not very much in love with and very passionately excited to climb into bed with at the end of the day, because that's the bar for me, right? I don't care if you have money or if you don't have money. I've dated people who make modest incomes, who I've had to help support, who are really quite wealthy, right? I mean, like, in New York, it's not hard to meet people who have success because you need to be successful to live in New York in the first place, right? So my point is that, look, genetically blessed. I feel very, very grateful for the genetic hand that I was dealt, which has afforded me the luxury of getting to walk in a lot of different shoes. Well, look, most of the guys that I dated were all older than me, right? My very first boyfriend was 2 years older than me. And then the next guy was 4 years older than me. And then the next guy was 8 years older than me, right? So, and then the next guy was 30 years older than me. But I didn't know he was 30 years older than me. I had dated a guy who was a musician in a band, who was, drummer, who was really the greatest love of my life at that point. I mean, people would see us and go, why don't you two get married? But one of the few times I was actually disappointed in my father. My father liked him very much, but took me aside one day and said, what kind of life are you going to have with him, Donna? He doesn't make that much money. And quite frankly, I made more money than he did, right? So I was paying for, we took trips, I paid for it, right? So I've been on both sides of this coin, which is why I want to talk really open and honestly about it. So when he and I broke up, which was largely because, like, honestly, Charlie Sheen stopped me on the street and gave me a part in the movie Wall Street and then invited me to call the production office and come and see them shoot wherever they were shooting. And as a young wannabe actress, I was more than excited to do that. And my boyfriend wanted to go with me. And I knew quite well that they weren't inviting me and my boyfriend. So yeah, we ended up breaking up over that, right? Which, career is probably the biggest reason why I had never gotten married. But without getting off topic, when he and I broke up, I had a modeling shoot in the Hamptons. The very first time I ever went to the Hamptons was on the Friday before Labor Day weekend with another model who was also named Donna. Actually, she was black and I was white. They called us the Donnas, right? And, we were shooting at this guy's house. And of course, he invited all his friends to come hang out by the pool and watch the modeling shoot that was going on in his backyard. And at the end of the day, he invited us to stay. And she and I looked at each other and said, I'll stay if you stay, right? And we ended up staying. So that was my introduction to the wealth, really, of the Hamptons. And interestingly, I won't tell you all the stories, but I met a guy, right, who I didn't know how old he was. I knew he was older than me, but he was very charming and funny. And he had a speedboat that was very interesting to me because I grew up boating. And we started dating. And I really liked him, right? For the beginning of the relationship, I was crazy about him. And he was born and raised in New York. He was showing me all sorts of stuff about New York that I was pretty new to New York, right? So that was a really nice thing. But I came to realize that he was actually 30 years older than me. And, about 3 months into the relationship, which, I've been very open about saying most relationships only last 3 to 6 months, I wasn't really all that into him anymore. And I wanted out of the relationship. But he kept luring me back in. Like, I'd break up with him and then he'd dangle some really fun thing in front of me and he'd suck me back in. And that happened a lot. One of those things was a brand new Porsche, right? Because I'm a car girl. I like cars, stick shift. But, it was his car. He just bought it for to entice me to stay with him, right? And that went on for about a year and a half. He kept dragging me past jewelry stores and saying, pick one, any one, like I'll buy you any ring you want. And I kept saying to him, I am not going to marry you, right? And God help me if I had, right? Unfortunately, there are a lot of women that will get married just for that. And, my father said to me when I turned 30, I thought you'd be married by now. And I was like, Dad. And he was like, wait, let me finish. At the same time, I'm really proud of you that you didn't marry some guy just to have him take care of you. I want to be Donna Barnes, not someone's wife, unless I'm crazy about him and I'm dying to climb in bed with him at the end of the day, right? And that was never acceptable for me, especially because I did that at 21, right? Like I really got a glimpse into that. And that was a very unhappy lifestyle of it. And we fought a lot, right? I think that's what happens. The best way to get out of having sex with somebody is to start an argument with them, right? But I don't want to be in that kind of relationship. It came to a head. I mean, now think the 80s, right? Everybody wore fur coats everywhere, which actually first coming back. And you used to have to sign your name to get your coat back. And we were out at some place and they lost my coat, my fur coat. And my 21-year-old self was not very nice about it that they couldn't find my coat. And then they did ultimately find it, but it was not very nice to that coat check girl. And I walked outside of the restaurant and I stood there at the curb for a second and I thought about it and I was just like, who am I? This is not me. I'm not the girl that yells at somebody because they lost my coat, right? And I don't want to be that person, more importantly. So the biggest catalyst to get me out of that relationship was that I didn't like who I became. Because I was in a relationship with somebody that, of course, I cared about him and I enjoyed his company, but I'd lost my attraction to him and I didn't want to be with him anymore. I learned that lesson as a 21-year-old. I really like the expression, the girl that marries for money earns every penny, because that's highly true, right? If you get into a relationship largely because that person has money, but you're not really into that guy, be careful what you wish for. It's a very unhappy situation to be in, to have to climb in bed with a man that you don't want to have sex with. And yeah, people get very clever about avoiding getting in bed and all sorts of other things to, and they drink too much. They become addicts themselves because it's the only way they can stand to have sex with the guy, right? Be careful what you sign up for. It sounds great, right? I mean, the Eagles made a song, right? Lion Eyes, they called it, right? City girl seemed to find out early how to open doors with just a smile. A rich old man and she won't have to worry, right? But that's not true. And if you listen to that song, she's not happy. She's got a lover on the other side of town, right? So when something's new and exciting, then yeah, it can be fun, but 3 to 6 months, right? 3 to 6 months in, if that's no longer how you feel, get out. all the bells and whistles will not make you happy if you're with somebody that you don't want to be with. I can promise you that. Especially as a young girl, it's hard not to be seduced, really, by that kind of affluence, especially if you've never been exposed to it. And going back to the comments on my channel, somebody said, a guy will marry the Taco Bell girl if she's adorable, right? And men are very visual. I know that men's brains are wired. They've done brain imaging studies where they've looked at couples in love, and it's still the visual cortex that lights up for men when they look at the woman that they're in love with. So, they say beauty's only skin deep. And Howard Stern is famous for saying, show me a beautiful girl and I'll show you a guy who's tired of fucking her. But my point is that men are very visual. And I get that, right? And look, genetically blessed, right? I'm very grateful the genetic hand that I was dealt. So I've been lucky enough to be able to make choices of people in my life. And that is where I am coming from mostly with making this video. Be careful what you wish for on both sides of that coin. If you are a man with wealth and you see a girl who really has nothing, be careful of how quickly you flash your wealth at her, because it's really hard not to get sucked into that, right? And while she might like you, unless she's crazy about you, that's going to become a very toxic situation. And look, I mean, my gosh, you see things in movies like The Wolf of Wall Street was very funny, right? That his wife was so tired of him. And look, Leo DiCaprio is a very good looking guy, right? Like, my point is that to lead with money is really, I think, difficult for most young girls to not fall victim to or prey to, right? I mean, geez, years ago, I had a girlfriend who met a very wealthy man who was actually close to her age. He was in the toy industry, right? And they were having dinner and he said to her, "What's your favorite car?" And thinking it was a hypothetical situation, she threw out two, like a Hummer and a Mercedes, right? And then the next day, a car carrier showed up in front of her building. Somebody rang her door and it had a Mercedes and a Hummer on the car carrier. And the guy said, "I have instructions for you to pick which one you want." And she actually said, "Can I drive one?" And he said, "No, if it comes off the truck, it's yours," right? But much to her credit, she sent them both back. And she was a little mad that he tried to buy her that way. Like, now they call it love bombing, right? If you do have that kind of money, it is very difficult for a young girl to say no to. Be careful what you wish for, right? So you get that beautiful young girl, and yeah, you can mold her into whatever you want her to be, and she may or may not stay with you, right? Because the other side of it is, while you're young, you can get a young, beautiful girl. And look, a 50-something guy can get a 30-something girl or a 40-something girl with no problem, or maybe even a 20-something girl if he's got a lot of money and he's handsome. But as you get into 60, it's not that easy. And as a matchmaker, I can tell you, I've had a lot of, look, there was a guy who was 65, I want to say, who was fairly handsome, not exceptionally handsome, but, and successful, not ridiculously successful, but seemed like a really good match for my 66-year-old, very beautiful, very successful woman who lived in his same city. And he refused to meet her because he very arrogantly said to me, "I've never dated anybody my own age in my whole life." And then he started telling me about the girl that he'd just broken up with, who was 20 years younger than him, but she was an alcoholic. He had to get her parents involved because she just, she was an addict, which that has its whole host of problems, right? So the problem is, and now I'm talking to you, if you're an older guy and you've had younger women, as a matchmaker, I will tell you, it is significantly harder once you're 60 plus to get someone who's still in their 40s or 30s or 20s, because 60 just sounds that much older, right? And I know people lie and they're not, and and actually at this point, people take much better care of themselves, right? But I'm just saying, I know people who had young, beautiful wives or women in their life And then as they got older, the woman left. And then now they're by themselves and they never end up in another relationship because they want that young girl still. But that young girl doesn't want the old man. And to that point, years ago in New York, I met a woman who was almost 20 years older than me. So, when I was 35, she was about 55. And she was married to a man who was 20 years older than her. And she was having an affair. And she very honestly said to me, yeah, when I met him, he was 45. He was very handsome. He was very charismatic. But now when she's 55, he's 75 and a very frail 75, right? So she wanted to leave him and he didn't, want her to. So she said to him, well, I'm going to date other people. And she was dating other people, but she was still with him. And she said to me, this was before I started coaching people, right? She said, do not ever marry a man that's that much older than you because he's going to become an old man, which goes back to my point of depending on how old you are as you're watching this, but 50 something is a whole lot sexier than 60 something because unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about aging, right? You get older every year, every year, every year. And honestly, when I was younger, I always dated guys who were about 40, actually, I've said to a lot of people, right? When I was in my 20s, when I was in my 30s, and then I came 40. And ever since then, I date guys within 2 to 3 years of my age in either direction, really for the most part. And most of the guys I've dated have been a year or two younger over the last couple of decades, right? Which the first guy that I dated when I was 40, I dated a guy who was 38. And that was the first guy I ever dated that was younger than me. And if I'm honest, I really struggled with it, right? So at this point, I'm in my 50s. I want somebody who is within 2 or 3 years older than me or younger than me and not much more. Because at this stage of life, aging is inevitable. And I want to grow with somebody. I want to, and I don't want a man who wants some 20 something that, is using him for his money, right? So, ask yourself what it is you really want. Do you want that young, beautiful girl that doesn't really love you? Or do you want a girl who's closer to your age, who's taken great care of herself, who might also be a beautiful girl, who really loves you for you? Because I'll tell you, that's the holy grail, right? To really connect with somebody and have chemistry and really love them. I've long said I will never get married unless I'm crazy in love with that person on my wedding day. Really, the biggest test for me, especially at this point in my life, is who do I want to go home with at the end of the night? If we're out somewhere and we're having a great time and you look at me and say, babe, you ready to go home? And I say yes, and I'm ready to go home and climb in bed with you. That's what I want in a relationship. Because quite frankly, if I'm with a guy that I'm not, I like him, but I'm not that into him. No, I'm not ready to go home yet. I want to stay out because I'm not really that excited about climbing in bed with you. And that's a big tell, actually. If you're with somebody and they're avoiding having sex with you, it's because they're really not that into you, right? And if you have money, this happens all the time, right? The lifestyle is nice. And yes, she likes you, but does she love you? And is she in love with you? Right now, there's whole other levels of that too. I do know, if women gain weight and they don't feel good about themselves, they don't feel sexy. That's not about you. That's about them. But if you've got some hot young thing and she's now all of a sudden avoiding getting in bed with you, it's because she's not all that into you. And I hope you'll love yourself enough to get out of that kind of relationship, right? Because finding someone who really loves you for you, I promise you, will make you happier than anything else. Because to me, that's the holy grail. And you can't buy that, right? All the money in the world can't buy love and happiness. So it's not about that. And I know it's about that for a lot of you guys that made comments and said, yeah, women are in it for the business and men are in it for the beauty and youth. And what you should really be looking for is someone who really understands you and communicates with you and has commonality with you. The whole sex and money thing is, look, they call prostitution the oldest profession, right? And there's a whole host of people out there that really think that if a guy's sleeping with the girl, he should pay all her bills and her rent and everything else, right? So it's like there is a transactional of, love and money, right? But love is the part that I think has to be essential, right? And I think that's the hard part. If you lead with your money, you don't know whether she really loves you or not. I got so many comments on my last video about not asking a woman her body count, saying, well, then they should stop asking how much money we make. And yeah, I agree, actually. I very much agree. And men's egos are largely tied to what they do and how much money that they make. And as a dating coach in New York City, I can't even tell you how many guys, men, 40-ish men even sometimes, have said to me, I can't afford to date. This city is so expensive, right? Like New York is an anomaly, right? Like, well, yeah, San Francisco is too, right? But like my point is like, if your cost of living, if you're living above your means, then you really can't afford to date. And unfortunately, I think that's true for a lot of guys. However, if you're a woman watching this, I really want to encourage you that, well, yes, it's really wonderful. Look, my father used to say it's just as easy to love a rich man as it is a poor man. And while that's 100% true, I've dated both, right? I've dated very wealthy men. And I've also dated men that I've had to kind of help out and support a little bit financially because they didn't quite make enough. For me, it's about love, right? Who are you crazy about? Who do you have chemistry with? Who can you not keep your hands off? I mean, that's the whole key of it, right? I had a girl come to me for coaching not that long ago because unfortunately she'd lost her parents young and she was quite the little entrepreneur. But she said to me, I'm exhausted. I want a sugar daddy. I want somebody to just take care of me. She was like, I'm tired of taking care of me. And I spent several hours talking her out of that, actually, right? Because I mean, with money also comes control frequently. And if you set it up that you're completely dependent on your guy, he now pretty much has control. And then you're also stuck if you don't want to leave that relationship and you can't financially afford it. I mean, crap, that happens a lot. There was a guy that I connected with that I like, I don't connect with people like that very often. It's really hard for me. And then on our second date, he confided in me that, like, yeah, he was kind of supporting this other lady and he was done with the relationship, but like, yeah, I never saw him again. So be careful what you wish for, right? If you get into a relationship with somebody who you're not really that crazy about, but they're taking care of you, that's a really sad life to sign up for. And I'd really like to encourage you to work hard for yourself and not depend on a man to take care of you. I get it. Men are angry that women look at them to be the moneymaker, right? But I mean, like historic roles where women didn't work, women stayed home and cooked and cleaned and took care of the kids, and they had a man that took care of them. Those old style of thinking, I think, don't go away easy. But empowered working women will make better choices about the person in their life. And I think having a true partner is always the best choice. If you can get that young girl because you're flashing your money at her, how long is she going to stick around? Right? How long are you actually going to still have her in your life 20 years from now when maybe you're not as youthful and maybe you don't even have as much money, right? You never know. You want to be with somebody who really has your back, who really loves you and supports you and cares about you and is excited to climb into bed with you. Because that's the holy grail of a relationship, in my opinion. The age-old sex and money, right? And May December relationships, as they call them, and dating for other reasons besides just that you're crazy about each other. It happens all the time. But just something to think about. I'd like to encourage you to hold out for somebody that you're crazy about and that you can't keep your hands off of, in addition to them being your best friend. So yes, leave me your comments. I enjoy your comments. Please like my video if you do, and leave me your questions if you want me to make a video for you. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next podcast.